Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I have a Christie character ranking, this time ranking almost every recurring character in the Christie universe. I say almost every because I did leave some people out. I mean, to me, a recurring character is a character of some importance who are part of the setting and the characterization and the world building and the plot without being like true suspects themselves. They obviously make more than one appearance. Now, to clarify, I did leave certain people out. First of all, there are a lot of like generic police inspectors who sometimes share a name. I think unless I put them on the list, these are different people. We also have a few people who are recurring characters, but were not conceived to be. They were originally suspects, like Major Despard and Rhoda Dawes from Cards on the Table, or Bunch Harmon from A Murder is Announced, Amy Carnby from the Nemean Lion story. She does appear in other stories in that collection. To me, a suspect is not really a recurring character. There are few exceptions, and some I did debate over that status. There's also other people who it's not clear are the same people. Like we have an Amy Leatherin in Murder in Mesopotamia. We also have one in Passenger Frankfurt. I don't know if those are the same people. We also have like Dr. Stillingfleet from The Dream and Third Girl. There's a French train conductor named Pierre Michel in two novels, but I don't think they're the same person. And maybe it's the same person, I don't know. We also have cases of Christie just botching names, like Mr. Entwistle from After the Funeral also appears, I think, under a different name in like Hickory Dickory Dock. I didn't include like really minor characters like Treadwell, the butler from The Secret of Chimneys and Seven Dials Mystery. And of course, the possibility exists I missed someone. I did like triple check all of my reference books, and I kept having to like redo the list and add more people as I found more and more. So, of course, the possibility exists that I missed someone. But before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. And before I begin, make sure you like this video and join the Discord link, which will be in the video description below. We have 51 characters to go through, so many of these are just very short entries. But starting out at the bottom, the worst recurring Christie character is, by a country mile, Mr. Goby. And I will say, I don't think Mr. Goby is like the worst drawn character of this group, but what I don't like about him is that Christie uses him as a cheap and easy way to provide info dumps when she cannot figure out how to move on in the plot. Mr. Goby is a private detective who just provides Poirot with a lot of background information. He appears in four novels, mostly the newer ones, but he did first appear in The Mystery of the Blue Train. He's not interesting, and it's a bit of a cop-out, to be honest, so he finishes last at number 51. At number 50, very similar to Mr. Goby, and that is Mr. Robinson. And Mr. Robinson is basically the same character as Mr. Goby. I would say Mr. Robinson is probably worse drawn than Mr. Goby, but why I have him above Mr. Goby is that Mr. Robinson appears in the Poirot verse, the Marple verse, and the Tommy and Tuppence verse, which I think is a nice little quirk. He might be the only person who does this, and Robinson is such an intelligence agent, and he's just like really dull and provides, again, more info dumps, and that's about it. But it's the quirk of his appearances that put him one spot above the bottom at number 50. At number 49, another really dull character, Colonel Ephraim Pikeaway, originally from Cat Among the Pigeons and two other novels, and he's just really boring. He's from the Special Branch, and he sort of exists just to move the plot along. Like, he never has any like true characterization or storyline going on. The only thing I know about his personality is that he's always sleeping, or appears to be sleeping, but there just isn't a lot going on here, so Colonel Pikeaway comes in at number 49. And number 48 is a character who I think could have just been better if he got more space, and that is Inspector Marriott, who appears in several of the Tommy and Tuppence Partners in Crime stories. And again, there's not a lot here for Marriott to do. He does set up the Beresfords at the agency and then like checks in on them from time to time, but he doesn't ever have anything really to do. I do have him above Pikeway, mostly because I think there's a lot of potential here, but again, potential is not it's not actuality, it's not reality. So Inspector Marriott comes in at number 48. At number 47, such an obscure character, we have Clara, the maid of Mrs. Price Ridley, who appears in three stories. How she got into three stories, I'll never know. But she's a bit of fun. I mean, she's really the one making up, or at least misbelieving the lies about Colonel Bantry and the body in the library. She tells her employer the body was naked when it wasn't. She's also the one who mistook a gunshot for a sneeze in Murder at the Vicarage. And it seems like Christie uses her as sort of like a catch-all for the help. Like, she doesn't do much help and every time we see her, she has a different boyfriend, and she is such a minor character, but at least she does have some plot relevance at times, so I put her at number 47. At number 46, basically the same thing, and that is Edna, Miss Marple's maid. And to be honest, I did consider putting Edna below Clara, as Clara is at least plot relevant at one time, but I do have Edna above her because she's Miss Marple's maid in a few of the short stories. But again, I do think she has sort of the makings of like a typical maid you would see in these sort of stories. And she is the one word about Gladys. Lots of maids named Gladys in the Marpleverse in the case of the perfect maid, and I think her proximity to Miss Marple is enough to put her here at number 46. At number 45, we're beginning a streak here of lesser important characters from the Tuesday Night Club, starting with Dr. Pender. And Pender is an elderly clergyman who is just kind of there. I think he is definitely like the least notable member of either of the dinner parties. He tells the idle house of Astarte, and I think he positions himself as a clergyman, and that will help him like solve the riddles. But he's no Father Brown. He's just kind of there for most of it. And he does nothing notable, so he's here at number 45. At number 44, similar thing, we have Dr. Lloyd, who is part of the second dinner party, and he tells the companion story. And the reason why I have him above Dr. Pender is because I think there's at least a little bit of the sinister going on here. He has led a life, apparently, and he drops a line that he had to leave England for a bit, which is curious. I want to know why. But other than that, I did not find him particularly interesting, and he does really nothing outside of his own tale, so he lands at number 44. At number 43, we have a little more interesting here with Mr. Petherick, the lawyer, and he tells the motive versus opportunity story, and I think he just has like a little bit more personality, a little bit more trust in Miss Marple. We also learn a little bit more about him in Miss Marple Tells a Story, although he is dead by then. His son has taken over the practice, but I do think there is a little more here, and I remembered his name without having to look it up, unlike Doctors Lloyd and Pender, so that was enough to put him here at number 43. At number 42, we have a generic police inspector, Colonel Johnson, from Three Act Tragedy and Hercule Poirot's Christmas. And while he is the main police in Three Act Tragedy, his placement here, this high, is entirely dependent on Hercule Poirot's Christmas. Like, I could not tell you off the top of my head what Johnson did in Three Act Tragedy, and the only reason why he is this high is because I love the scene in him and Poirot debating the central heating over the fireplace, with Johnson just enamored with the fireplace and Poirot just so miserable in front of the open fire. And that's all I got on Colonel Johnson, but he lands here at number 42. At number 41, and we're starting here a mini tier of characters from both The Secret of Chimneys and Seven Dials Mystery, starting out with Bill Eversleigh. And I've said this many times before that I just do not like The Secret of Chimneys. Is my least favorite Christie novel. Seven Dials Mystery is so much better, but Bill Eversleigh is such a slog. I mean, since most of Chimney's trying to marry Virginia Revel, and he is better and more mature in Seven Dials, but it's a bit of a little too late here. He's supposed to be like the hero of that book, but he doesn't like actually wind up doing anything heroic. I found him to be a bit of a flop in his first appearance and better in his second, but still, again, not really the heroic presence he was meant to be, so he lands at number 41. At number 40, we have his companion, Bundle Brent, Lady Eileen Bundle Brent. Sort of the same thing here. I think she's the worst iteration of these like young, adventurous women Christie created in the 1920s. And I think that works against her when I see the likes of like Tuppence and Anne Bedingfeld and even like Frankie from Why Didn't They Ask Evans. So Bundle does suffer in comparison, but I also feel like she had squandered potential. Again, I do like her more in Seven Dials and her repeated attempts to sneak into the club and all of that. And I suspect most people would probably rank her higher, but just like looking up those above her, I find them at least more interesting or have a moment I recall from them that I just don't with Bundle, so she lands at number 40. At number 39, we have Bundle's father, Lord Caterham. And this might be weird because he plays a far lesser role than Bundle, but he's also, I think, a little more interesting than Bundle. I don't necessarily think he's like my favorite, but I can recall all of his like sarcastic remarks and how he hates mornings and people. He's just like the complete opposite of what you would expect from a country squire. So there is like some minor memorable characterizations here, so Lord Caterham lands at number 39. At number 38, still from the same two novels, we have George Lomax. Again, Lomax is not like the greatest character, obviously, but I can recall small character moments about him, especially how he's always like grabbing onto people's coats when he talks to them, and his generally like nervous disposition. And he does play fairly major roles in both of his appearances. He probably is like less memorable than the others, but I wouldn't have minded like another appearance from George Lomax just because I think he's a little more defined personality wise. He lives in Wyvern Abbey and he throws that party. I think he's just better than the others because we see a little bit less of him. So what we do see is mostly good and less irritating. But I really just can't put him any higher than here at number 38. At number 37, a character who I think is good, and this is a trend for like the next couple here or so, but we just like don't see a lot to justify a higher ranking. And at number 37, I have Deborah Beresford, daughter of Tommy and Tuppence. I should note Deborah's twin brother, Derek, only appears once in NRM, so he's not on the list. Neither is her sister, Betty, who also has only one appearance. But Deborah is the one we see the most of in the final three Beresford novels. She is a codebreaker during the war in NRM, and I love her observations about her parents, first of all, underestimating their abilities and commenting on like their kooky situations all the time, and how she's just like completely baffled by like her parents find them in these like ridiculous situations. She also appears in Posture and a Fate, but less said about that book the better. I wish I could put Deborah higher because I do find her fascinating and interesting, but she just like never amounts to more than a cameo appearance at best. And there's also a lack of continuity, especially regarding her age and her children and the age of her children. It's not consistent, so I am forced to leave Deborah here at number 37. At number 36, another generic inspector, Superintendent Albert Spence. I will say that if Spence had only appeared in Taken at the Flood and Mrs. McGinty's Dead, he probably would be higher up. I do find him a little better than generic, especially Mrs. McGinty, where he doesn't think James Bentley is guilty, but Christie also brings him back for Halloween Party and Elephants Can Remember, where he just doesn't do a lot. He seemed to be there just so Christie can reminisce about her past books, but I honestly could not tell you anything about his personality. I know he has a sister, and if the book didn't tell me he was in those other novels, I probably would never have known, but he is a little bit more prominent than the rest up to this point, so that's enough to land at number 36. At number 35, we have a character I'm sure many of you may not be familiar with, but that is Madeline DeSera, associate of Parker Pine, and she is the disguise expert who often plays the role of femme fatale when needed. She aids Mr. Pine in some of his more unusual antics like causing blackouts, stealing things, etc. She lives a double life, and when she's not causing mischief for Parker Pine, she lives a quiet life with her unsuspecting parents, which is really funny, and she's a fun character, but not one too important to the canon, so she comes in at number 35. At number 34, we have her associate, Claude Luttrell, not to be confused with Claude Durrell, a sort of the similar character actually from the Big Four. But Claude is a sleazy lounge lizard whom Parker Pine hires to seduce women when need be. I do find maybe Madeline a little bit more interesting, but I think Claude is a little bit more developed, and that is what propels him one spot above Madeline. And Claude does play a little bit more important role in the stories he does appear, so that was enough to put him at number 34. At number 33, a very fun character, but still one we don't see a lot of, and so I can't put her higher, and that is Miss Caroline Weatherby. This is one of Miss Marple's gossipy friends from St. Mary Mead. She is the one who's probably the meanest of them. She's described as vinegary by the Reverend Clement, and she is a mean gossip as well, especially as we see in the body in the library, where she is the one primarily responsible for the slander against Colonel Bantry. She's always making nasty comments about people and accusing them of things. We do learn she died sometime before the mirror cracked, and she had been dead for a while, so we don't see her in that novel, and that does make her the least well-known, the least prominent of these women, but I still thought she was a lot of fun when she does appear, but again, a little bit more than a cameo appearances from her, so she's at number 33. At number 32, and this might be a surprise as this is one of the bigger, I mean not bigger characters, but one of the more well-known names on the list here. But at number 32, I have Georges, Poirot's manservant. And for me, it's that we just never learn anything about him. We're told how good of a manservant he is, but he's never plot relevant. He basically just shows people in and out of Poirot's flat and brings cocktails. Poirot trusts him, and we know Georges is great at describing people. He really just has nothing to do in any of the novels or short stories except for the very tail end of Curtain, where, spoiler alert for Curtin, George seems a little baffled and upset Poirot fired him and that Poirot was lying about George's absences. But again, that's more of a Poirot character moment than George. And I think also just hurting George is the existence of other better characters in his mold in other series so that he pales in comparison. So George comes in at number 32. At number 31, and this was a bit tough one for me, and that is Dr. Haydock from the Marple world. And I think Dr. Haydock is a particularly unlikable character, especially in Murder at the Vicarage, where he espouses some not great views on eugenics, basically. But this is intentional. Christie sets him up as a straw man for Miss Marple to tear down, and she is so great at doing that. And he makes multiple other appearances in other works, but there he comes across as a bit more like generic country doctor. But I do always get a kick out of his telling Miss Marple to find a murder to solve when she's sick, and Miss Marple just completely lapping circles around him, like in Sleeping Murder when he tells her to go to the seaside, which is basically how she manipulated him. If Dr. Haydock was a more likable figure, he might have been a little higher, but again, he's still a very good character, so he's here at number 31. At number 30 is a character I did not even know was a recurring character until I researched, and that is Cherry Baker, originally from The Mirror Cracked, but also in Nemesis. This is Miss Marple's kindly caretaker who replaced the terrible Miss Knight. And Cherry is a lot kinder, and Miss Marple likes her more, even if she isn't as good as at the housework. I think Cherry is the one who dumps all the clothes in one load of laundry, and Miss Marple can't even watch. She can't even look at her when she does that. But Cherry, does play a pretty not large, but significant role in the plot of The Mirror Cracked. She is the one the maid Gladys, a different maid Gladys, told, and spoiler alert here for that book, but she did it on purpose, meaning Marina intentionally spilled Heather's drink, although Cherry gets it backwards. But Cherry is a very likable presence, more so than Dr. Haydock, so she lands one spot above him at number 30. At number 29 is someone who really is just this high because of his importance in the canon, and that is Mr. Carter, who first appeared in The Secret Adversary, and then again in some of the short stories. He usually does get mentioned in the other Tommy and Tuppence novels, and again, Mr. Carter is someone who, I really couldn't tell you that much about his, personality. Nothing stands out to me, nothing sticks with me, but he is an important character when he appears, and he is the one who basically gave the Beresfords their start. I mean, he's not a dud by any means. He's really Lord Easthampton, and he works in intelligence. And there's actually a lot of, even Mr. Goby here. But Mr. Carter, sets up the investigation instead of, swooping in an info dump. Other than that, I really just can't say much about him. He's a larger character than most of the ones we've already talked about. And he's not problematic or dull, so he finishes at number 29. At number 28, we have another member of the Tuesday Night Club, Jane Hellier, or Hellier, and technically she is a recurring character. She only appears in that collection, but in multiple stories, and she's not a suspect or anything, so she does qualify, and I just found her a lot of fun. She's a lot better than some of those other, people who only appear at the Tuesday Night Club. She's not the most profound character, but her lack of intelligence just provides for some great moments, and her story, The Affair at the Bungalow, is a lot of fun as well, and that is what is putting her this high. She is more memorable than the others, and she does stand out, but outside of that, again, she's not particularly notable in the grand scheme of the Christie universe, but so she lands here at number 28. At number 27, we have another of the old biddies in St. Mary Mead, Mrs. Martha Price Ridley. And Mrs. Price Ridley is probably, I would say, the most prominent of the three neighbors of Miss Marple. We first meet her in Murder at the Vicarage, where she has her church donation stolen and makes a big deal out of that, where Leonard Clement just can't even with her. She actually thinks the vicar stole it, which results in Griselda and Dennis making very lewd and mean prank calls to her cottage, which is really funny. And she also tries to incriminate Colonel Bantry in the body of the library, where she spends a lot of her time there just spreading the gossip about him, and even she says she saw him acting suspiciously, and I think it's pretty clear she knows he didn't do it, but she's just spreading these rumors anyway. And she's again another one of these nosy widows slash spinsters. She is the widow of St. Mary Mead, and she's a bad gossip, but unlike Mrs. Weatherby, I actually think Mrs. Price at least has kinder intentions. She's not maliciously spreading spreading gossip. Okay, maybe she is, but not as bad as Miss Weatherby. But she at least thinks it's true. Like, she has convinced herself it's true, at least, whereas Miss Weatherby is definitely meaner. But Mrs. Price Ridley comes in at number 27. At number 26, probably one of the bigger names on this list, especially this bottom part of the list, but I just never really liked this person, and that is Colonel Race, first seen in The Man in the Brown Suit. And he appears in four novels: The Man in the Brown Suit, Cards on the Table, Death on the Nile, and Sparkling Cyanide. And the latter two, I just have no idea why Christie decided to use them. He feels so extraneous and wedged in. I think both novels are fantastic as they are, but probably even better without him. But he is good in The Man in the Brown Suit, where I guess he's a suspect. I mean, that is his best appearance, and he has a lot of fun on the ship and in South Africa with Anne Benningfield. But in Cards on the Table, he begins good, and then he just sort of like disappears with no explanation. He does come across a bit generic intelligence officer in his other appearance, and to be honest, the fact that he gets cut from a lot of the adaptations, I think, is a pretty big tell that maybe he isn't so crucial to the story as he appears to be. He seemingly knows everyone everywhere, and I do think Christie just sort of elevates him to like a perfect godlike figure at times in a way that I don't feel is justified. And I know Colonel Race has his fans out there, but I'm not really amongst them, so he comes in at number 26. At number 25, we have someone who appeared under two names, I think at least, and that is Joan West / Joyce Lampriere, the wife of Raymond West. And I did feel confident enough to say Joan West and Joyce Lampriere are the same person. She goes by Joyce in the 13 Problems, and then it's Joan from that point forward. And the novels do make it pretty clear they are the same person, but Christie obviously went the like Rex Stout school of who cares about continuity here. And maybe there's some like subtext here about Raymond West being like a terrible husband, that his wife changed her name or something. But anyway, Christie also sets her up to be a bit of a straw man herself. She's very cocky in the 13 Problems and dismisses Miss Marple. And of course, Joyce / Joan doesn't solve anything herself and has to suffer being married to Raymond West instead. But I like this like mild tension between Miss Marple and Joan, where Joan always seems very bothered that her husband keeps taking care of Miss Marple, and that Miss Marple never wants to do what Joan wants to do, and Miss Marple often gets her way. Joan resents this a lot, and it's a lot of fun. And it's definitely like minor in content, but a good impact when she appears. So Joan / Joyce comes in at number 25. At number 24, we have the final of Miss Marple's old biddy neighbors, Miss Amanda Hartnell. And to be honest, I think Mrs. Price Ridley is probably my favorite of the three, but Miss Hartnell, I think, just has a larger presence, so I did put her above the rest. First of all, she's only 55, but she's treated as if she's like 85. She's the least prominent of the three in Murder at the Vicarage, but the most prominent in the later stories. She is the one who finds the body in tape measure murder, and she is on a tirade against developing St. Mary Mead and the Mirror Crack. She really hates the supermarket and having to go around shopping for herself, but don't disagree. Miss Hartnell would probably hate, though, like DoorDash or something if she were around today, despite being basically what she wants. And that's that sort of like zestiness and flair that puts her above her neighbors. I would love to watch, by the way, like a Golden Girls-esque show of Miss Marple, Miss Hartnell, Mrs. Price Ridley, and Miss Weatherby. Wouldn't that be great? But Miss Hartnell is the top of those non-Marple ones here at number 24. At number 23, probably one of the more misunderstood characters on this list, Vera Rosakoff. And I think people sort of warp the relationship between Vera and Poirot into something it's not. Poirot is smitten with her, but they are not lovers. Poirot has a commanding respect for this jewel thief. And I really love how on occasion Poirot will compare other women to Vera Rosakoff and just be like, nope, not even close. And she's a very crafty individual, but also a bit of a sad story. I know a lot of people want more of her, but I think Christie using her sparingly is ideal as this mysterious figure who sort of looms over Poirot even when she's not around. And I think she is a great character, but again, she does have limited appearances, which does make it harder for her to be a little higher on the list, but she does come in at number 23. At number 22 is someone I don't think I've ever talked about on this channel before until earlier in this video, and that is Parker Pine. Are you unhappy with this placement on this list? Well, call Parker Pine. I feel very mixed on Parker Pine in the sense that, similar to like a Lord Peter Wimsey, he is kind of an annoying jerk, but that makes such a fascinating character, and his short stories are just so wild and unhinged at times, mostly because of his antics. And he's another one of these bland looking like older men with just like a wild personality. He is fascinating, but again, he does have a tendency to be a little unlikable, if not just totally unhinged at times. I mean, some of the ways he ends those short stories end are just ridiculous, like the case of like the, I forget what it's called, the case of like the older housewife or something, whatever it was. So I landed him here at number 22. At number 21 is someone I actually did consider put lower on the list, and that is Colonel Melchett from the Marpleverse. And I do think there are elements of Melchett that are a bit generic police inspector, but I did put him higher than the likes of like Colonel Johnson and Superintendent Spence, because I do think there is some development there unique to him, especially in his interactions with Miss Marple. I also think he has a more commanding role in the likes of like the body in the library, and part of that is because Miss Marple's MO of just taking the back seat and letting Melchett and the others take control. But I do find him a step above generic police inspector, but still nothing like too amazing, so he comes in at number 21. At number 20, and back to back here are two characters I did sort of like fudge my parameters to include. And here we have the Reverend Leonard Clement. And the reason why I included him at number 19 on this list is because people asked where they were when I did my best one time regular characters, but they appear in more than one book, so I couldn't include them there. But the vicar doesn't really meet my definition of recurring character because he's like technically a suspect in the murder at the vicarage, but I did fudge to get him on the list here. And what a great character, just fantastic narrator. I love how he sort of subverts what we expect from a typical British country vicar. I love how he has no qualms about his true thoughts on Colonel Prothero, and his relationship with Griselda is fantastic. He's definitely like overpowered by the women in his life, like Griselda, Miss Marple, Mrs. Price Ridley, the maid that lives there, and he's just so much fun complaining about like the maid and his neighbors. I never mind his contributions to the murder investigation. He would have made the one-time character list had it not been for a cameo in The Body in the Library, but he does make this list at number 20. And at number 19, we have his wife, Griselda Clement, another fantastic character who would have made the one-time character list. And as much as I find Leonard great, I find Griselda just a hair better. She's much more fun, like absolutely not your typical vicar's wife. She makes crank calls, she gossips. Okay, maybe that's typical. But I love when she calls Miss Marple that terrible Miss Marple, which is just honestly so perfect of a description. And she is so much fun as this bad homemaker who doesn't know what she's doing, and her inability to manage the maid is funny. I personally like her cameo in The Body in the Library, where she tells Miss Marple all about these child-rearing books, and then she just immediately does the exact opposite of what the books say when no one is looking. And she's really just fantastic and comes in at number 19. At number 18, and to be honest, I think this spot is a little generous to this character, and that is Superintendent Battle. And I'm sort of mixed here. I do think there are elements of generic police inspector here. I also think there are elements of like Colonel Race here in terms of like why is Battle in some of these novels, but I do think he gets great characterization in Towards Zero when he's thinking about his daughter and how he compares that situation to the murder before him. I think it's very funny him wearing the clock face mask in Seven Dials Mystery, which is just so ridiculous. And I think when Battle is good, he's excellent, but he also has like questionable appearances. I don't think he does a lot in Towards Zero, really, to be honest, in terms of like solving the murder. He's in Murder is Easy, apparently, which I did not remember. That must be a cameo. And Colin Lamb from The Clocks is implied to be his son, which is a bit weird, to be honest. So it is a bit of a mixed bag. And I did sort of give him a generous ranking, I think, here at number 18. At number 17, and this might be a surprise as well, but I am only assessing the text here, And here we have Miss Lemon, Poirot's secretary, and also Parker Pyne's secretary. And again, I think this might be a little generous, to be honest. I mean, most people know Miss Lemon from Pauline Moran in the Suchet Poirots, but Miss Lemon isn't really in the text all that much. And when she is, it's usually in passing. Like, she never really plays a big role, except for maybe in, like, Hickory Dickory Dock or one or two of the short stories. But even then, it's really minor, with her making like uncharacteristic mistakes in Hickory Dickory Dock, which is funny. I do think that's actually one of the best Christie openings. But Poirot constantly describes her as efficient, even to the point where he doesn't realize she has a life outside of the office. She's like shocked, like, oh, she has parents. Like, what were the odds of that happening? She's also described as ugly, which is weird. And my favorite fact about her is that she's developing her own filing system she's very proud of, but there really just like isn't a lot of her, and what is there, to be honest, is a bit thin. Like, she's not anywhere near the prominence or interestingness of Pauline Moran's Miss Lemon, so I did put her here at number 17. At number 16, we have a very important character from the Marpleverse, Sir Henry Clithering. And again, I think there are some aspects of him that come across as generic police inspector, being the retired head of Scotland Yard, but he is far more interesting. He is the one who recognizes Miss Marple's sharp mind and abilities, and it is Sir Henry who often has to force those below him to take Miss Marple seriously. He is so impressed with her, and I think that is exactly what she needs. Without Sir Henry, there really is no Miss Marple, because Miss Marple intentionally hides in the background, but she needs people like Sir Henry to listen to her and to provide her information. And her connection to Sir Henry is crucial in that. As we see in later novels without Sir Henry, Miss Marple does sometimes struggle to break through and has to rely on other Sir Henry-like figures to give her the time of day. Or also sometimes she has to call Sir Henry and tell them, nudge him in the right direction, or nudge the local police detective to listen to her. And I think Sir Henry's role in the canon is sort of important, but again, he isn't really all that interesting on his own. He's only interesting with Miss Marple, so he comes in here at number 16. At number 15, we have perhaps Christie's most bizarre and mysterious character, Mr. Harley Quinn. And I will not spoil, the big reveal of Harley Quinn, but he's this unusual person who happens to appear out of nowhere, typically when someone needs help. His car breaks down a lot outside of country estates, and he turns up in all kinds of places. He dresses like a harlequin, and usually what he does is that he guides Mr. Satterthwaite into the right solution to the mystery rather than outright solving it himself. And Harley Quinn was a favorite of Christie, although she did not write him very often. And overall, I feel like Mr. Quinn is something very unique in the Christieverse, and he comes in at number 15. At number 14, we have Mr. Quinn's companion, Mr. Satterthwaite. And I did debate about the order here, but I did put Satterthwaite above Quinn because we do see him more often. A lot of the Quinn and Satterthwaite stories are really focused on Mr. Satterthwaite, our resident snobbish old bachelor. He has a weakness for couples in love and always wants to help them through the powers Mr. Quinn gives him. And he's just very strange to me. He has that book he published about the homes of his friends, and he's obsessed with people of nobility and titles. And he's just a very fun presence, and he's very well drawn. And we also have his appearance in 3-Act Tragedy and Dead Man's Mirror, which, to be honest, I do feel like they're a little random, and he does feel out of place there. But very interestingly, Mr. Satterthwaite has yet to appear in a screen adaptation. He does appear in one of the radio adaptations, but he's almost always cut. In fact, I think he's always cut from the screen adaptations, and normally I would take that as an indication you're not really that necessary, but I think this is a rare exception to that rule, and Mr. Satterthwaite comes in at number 14. At number 13, we have the first of a husband and wife duo, Colonel Arthur Bantry, and it's clear to me Christie preferred Dolly to Arthur Bantry. Arthur Bantry has less appearances, less character development, and also dies during the course of the canon. And he is still a very well-drawn character, though. He is your typical country squire. He loves his pigs, he loves his wife, probably in that order. His best appearance is in The Body in the Library, where he has this great reaction to the maid finding the body, and just him being complete disbelief, and then the gossip starts swirling, and he becomes depressed, and becomes Miss Marple's main motivation in solving the murder, because as it stands, Colonel Bantry is basically the prime suspect, but the village rumors are worse. and he is a locally important person, but is like mostly ceremonial. And I like how he just like really can't be bothered to care about most of the things going on. And he also has this like feud with Basil Blake across the way, and it's all very nice of him and very great actually. And so I have Colonel Bantry here at number 13. At number 12, I have Sir Henry Clithering's godson, Dermot Craddock, also of Scotland Yard. And to me, Craddock is basically, I don't want to say like a knockoff of Sir Henry, but he is the one who came second. But he's also far more interesting. His trust in Miss Marple exists because he trusts Sir Henry, as we saw in A Murder is Announced, where he is skeptical of Miss Marple, but Sir Henry tells him to trust her, and he does. And that is a relationship moving forward. And I never found Craddock to be like the generic police inspector. He actually does have a lot of character development. He has a past and a backstory we learn about. We learn like his mother died when he was young and he just like stared into his pudding. Like that's an image that remains with me. I think that happens in Murder is Announced. I forget which book that gets mentioned in. But he feels like a human being and is definitely one of Christie's better police inspectors. So he comes in at number 12. And at number 11, just out of the top 10, we have someone I'm actually surprised is this high, and that is Raymond West, Miss Marple's nephew. And straight up, he's this high mainly because I love Miss Marple's sly digs at him that are just so brutal. And she talks about how awful his books are. A Caribbean Mystery is just full of Miss Marple hating and criticizing his novels, and it is a lot of fun. Raymond West is the one who funds a lot of Miss Marple's trips and vacations. He himself rarely has anything to do with actually like solving a mystery, but he does do like little things here and there. Like he recognizes like the fake professor or doctor or whoever in A Murder at the Vicarage, and he's mostly fun for Miss Marple's comments because they're so clever and so witty, and he's like such a garbage nephew anyway, even though he pays for everything. But Miss Marple's comments are just so on the nose about Raymond West, and it's for that reason I have him here at number 11. At number 10, we have another Miss Marple inspector. There's a lot of them, actually, and that is Inspector Slack. And Slack is the one who does not care for Miss Marple. He refuses to find her helpful or listen to what she has to say. She's a nuisance to him, and he is unlikable, but he is such a good character. I love the relationship between Slack and Marple. He is a good police officer, but he's hampered by his unimaginative ways, refusing to consider anything that isn't directly before his eyes. And it's just so much fun watching Miss Marple run circles around him and watching him having to grovel to her when he needs her help, and the likes of like Sir Henry when he doesn't listen to Miss Marple in the first place. And he's actually very similar to like Dr. Haydock, and then Christie does set him up for failure as a straw man, but he is such an excellent character, almost the best detective inspector in Christie, but not quite. But he does land in the top 10 at number 10. At number 9, and starting here, we have a streak of major sidekicks, starting with Ariadne Oliver, who I always found to be a lot of fun. Mrs. Oliver is the character Christie uses to represent herself and her own thoughts, mostly about her writing, where she just has so many fun quips about how horrible her writing is and how she hates it and how she hates her detective Sven Harrison, who is a thin parody of Poirot. I really love her in Mrs. McGinty's Dead, where she's just having an absolute worst time with Robin Upward adapting her novel for the stage, and he wants to change everything and make Sven young and handsome and have a lover, and she is just not having it. And we see her first in Cards on the Table. Actually, we see her first in Parker Pyne Investigates, but we do see her most often in the later career Poirots, where she does help Poirot in the absence of Hastings and Japp. And she is so scattered and just a mess, and she usually does wind up being helpful at points. She's very big on women's intuition, which she claims is always right, but it's only true because her intuition keeps changing throughout the novel, and eventually at some point she mentions the correct answer, so she counts that as a win. She's also obsessed with changing her hair and eating apples, though she does stop the apples after Halloween party. And she does have a bit of a teasing relationship with Poirot, although he often does not understand the jokes. But Mrs. Oliver is always a lot of fun, and she is Christie on the page, so she comes in at number 9. At number 8, and this is the highest ranked police detective, Chief Inspector James Japp. And I did consider putting Japp lower because, like Miss Lemon, I think people don't realize the sort of limited role Japp plays in the novels. He is not anywhere near as prominent as Philip Jackson makes him. He is in a lot of the earlier Poirots, but he's gone by 1940 in 1-2 Buckle My Shoe, minus like the Capture of Cerberus short story. But again, that was written much earlier. That would be the original Capture of Cerberus, not the one in the Labors of Hercules collection. But I still think Jap is worthy of being in the top 10. He is in some ways a kinder version of Inspector Slack. He is sort of hesitant and frustrated with Poirot at times, butting into things. But unlike Slack, Jap recognizes Poirot's skills and his helpfulness, and they are friends. I think the friendship between Jap and Poirot is very nice, and Jap is a little bit embarrassed by it, but it's very nice. There's a scene in 1-2 Buckle My Shoe where like Poirot visits Jap at Jap's house, and Jap sort of like looks around to see if the neighbors are watching, which is funny. And there, again, there's a little bit of a rivalry between Jap and Hastings as well, but again, it's not nearly as profound in the Suchet series. And Jap is like super British, which contrasts nicely to Poirot. He has a lot of like odd hobbies, or at least hobbies you wouldn't expect him to have, like gardening, and he is extremely useful in solving the mysteries. A lot of the police detectives just are not that useful in the books, honestly. They exist because they have to, but Jap exists because Christie wants him to. And, Jap does get the credit in the end. And, Jap does as well, but he at least contributes to that. And I just think the Christieverse wouldn't be the same without him, so he comes in at number 8. At number 7, and this might be a little controversial, I think a lot of you would just put this person lower, but I just absolutely love this character, and that is Albert Bat from the Tommy and Tuppence canon. And we've seen from like him from a small child to an elderly-ish man. He's originally the elevator or lift boy at Mr. Vandermeyer's flat, and then he joins the Beresfords when they have the detective agency and sticks by them in all of their adventures. I think he becomes something of a domestic to him, at least like a quasi-domestic. I don't think he's like a butler necessarily, but what I love most about Albert is his sense of imagination and adventure and how he treats even the most mundane task as a wild action scene. And he does all these like crazy ideas, like he thinks he's in an action movie and he just can't help himself when he does something to do, and it's the most bizarre way possible. It reminds me a lot of like a child like me having this sense of imagination, only Albert keeps it his entire life. And we do find out, he has a wife and kids, although their names are not consistent. He's apparently a bad cook. I love the passage in By the Pricking of My Thumbs where he doesn't realize that bulging can of like canned tuna or something is not safe to eat. And I just love Albert. He somehow didn't make my top 10 detective sidekicks, and neither did Jap, but I have to be honest, that list is bad. I need to remake that one because I'm not happy with it, but he does make the top 10 here at number 7. At number 6, we have the final character left, who I would say is a supporting cast member, not a main cast member, and that is Dolly Bantry. And I think it's clear Christie loved Mrs. Bantry. She is so much more prominent than her husband, playing pretty big roles in The Body in the Library and The Mirror Cracked, amongst other favorites. And she has that great opening where she dreams about winning the gardening show in The Body in the Library. She's also very active in that novel, trying to clear her husband's name. She's one of the guests at the 13 Problems dinners. And I know it's one of her lesser known appearances, but I love her in The Mirror Cracked, where Arthur has died and she gives up Gossington Hall to travel, and then she returns to St. Mary Mead, and she is just living her life to the fullest. She abandons that like widowhood pretty quickly. She doesn't miss the house, she doesn't really miss Arthur. She's free. And this is in stark contrast to how Christie usually depicts the sale of large country houses, where in the 50s and 60s she like laments their destruction and sale, but here Dolly Bantry just cannot care at all, and she's very happy that a movie star bought the property, and she tells everyone about the body she found in the library even though she didn't find it, and she goes to like snooping around Marina's new house. And Christie just has a lot of fun with Dolly Bantry. You can really sense it on the page, and she comes in at number 6. At number 5, and now we have the 5 biggest characters of the Christieverse, starting out with Tommy Beresford. And again, like the Bantrys, I think it's clear Christie preferred writing the wife over the husband, but the gap is much smaller with the Beresfords. And I personally love Tommy. I love his sort of like gung-ho, adventurous spirit and him just running headfirst into dangerous situations without thinking, and then he always gets like hit on the head all the time. He's a lot of fun in the Partners in Crime collection, where he pretends to be a priest in one story and the man in the corner in another, and he has to eat this like really horrible like cheesecake cake that he hates because that's what the man in the corner would eat. And I love reading Tommy and Tuppence, especially their earlier stories. They work out so well together, each complementing each other. And I love their love story. I so rarely care about love stories in these novels, but theirs is so much fun and adventurous without getting like mushy and soppy. I know the adaptation gets mushy and soppy, but the stories don't. And his Mr. Meadows and NRM is just so ridiculous, but in a good way. And the reason why I have Tommy lower than Tuppence is that I just think Tommy isn't as vibrant in the later stories, by the pricking of my thumbs and Postern of Fate. Postern of Fate is a mess anyway, but it's clear in those two novels that I think Tuppence is doing the brunt of the work. And he's also like a bit of a jerk in By the Pricking of My Thumbs, which is just very odd. I think like Christie's like miswriting him there or something. It's very odd because Tommy's not normally like that. But again, there's all those little tiny things that put Tommy here at number 5. At number 4, we have his wife. We have Tuppence Beresford, née Cowley. Tuppence is the best eye iteration of Christie's young, adventurous female she wrote a lot of in the 1920s and early 30s. She is just so full of life. But unlike Tommy, Tuppence is a little more of a thinker, the planner. She sets up a plan and enacts it, which works for her when it doesn't for Tommy. And she knows how to place suspects against each other and mislead them. The beginning of NRM is fantastic, with her hiding in the cupboard when Mr. Carter arrives to tell Tommy about that book's mystery. And then she actually gets to Sans Sushi before Tommy. She calls herself Mrs. Blankensop. And I think Tuppence is a delight in that book, where she makes up this whole backstory for herself and she doesn't remember any of it and can't keep any of it straight. She does a lot of good detecting work there, and also in By the Pricking of My Thumbs. I also love her in that novel where she deals with Mrs. Lancaster and the children in the fireplace and just like totally creeped out by her, but also her just hating Aunt Ada. We also hear a lot more about her childhood than Tommy's. We hear about it in The Secret Adversary a little bit, but mostly in Postern of Fate, which, I mean, it's Postern of Fate, but I think Christie loved Tuppence. I don't understand why we just didn't see more of the Beresfords, but I love what we did see of them, so Tuppence comes in at number 4. At number 3, and I mean, this person had to be here, and that is Captain Arthur Hastings. And admittedly, I did consider putting him below the Beresfords and just having, the top spots be Christie's main sleuths, but I just thought Hastings deserved to be above the Beresfords. It would be like not having Watson as number 2 on like a Sherlock Holmes version of this list. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And Hastings is Poirot's first and most important sidekick, as well as the narrator in the stories he appears. Their relationship is one that mimics Holmes and Watson, with Poirot being, the arrogantly smarter one, putting down Hastings at pretty much every opportunity. But in many regards, Hastings represents the reader who is trying to solve the murder alongside Poirot. He misinterprets pretty much everything, as the author wants the reader to do. And Christie uses Hastings magnificently in this regard. And yeah, maybe Poirot is a little mean to Hastings, calling him like the faithful hound and just like berating him for making incorrect deductions. The reader probably also made the same deductions, but I like the moment in like Peril at End House where Hastings says he likes Commander Challenger, so Poirot knows Commander Challenger is not a good guy. I have to say, not necessarily like the biggest fan of Hastings' relationship with his wife Dulcie, which seems really just to be there, but I do like his like visits to England after he relocates to Argentina, where it seems like his wife is just always mad at him. And I did speculate in a previous conspiracy video that Judith might not be his biological daughter, but I did like his relationship with Judith in Curtain. I thought that was a very interesting dynamic. The father-daughter is not really explored at all in Christie outside of Hastings and Judith. And Christie does banish Hastings pretty quickly. Like, he only appears in 8 novels, I mean, one of which is Curtain, but he is also in a lot of the short stories, and I get it. Like, she thought Poirot didn't need a sidekick, and he probably didn't, and she wanted to experiment with also, like, different ways to tell a story, different ways to structure a story that necessitated Hastings going away. But to me, Hastings is such an icon. He comes in at number 3. At number 2, I mean, aren't these top 2 very obvious? It's the age-old question, Poirot or Marple. And this was so tough, but I did sort of take the easy way out and went with the one who appears less often at number 2, and that would be Miss Jane Marple. And, I mean, what is there to say here? Iconic literary detective, 12 novels, nearly 20 short stories, absolutely perfect character. I think actually something Miss Marple has in favor over Poirot is that both have been, imitated on the page multiple times, many times, but the other elderly spinster sleuths like just cannot hold a candle to Miss Marple. Whereas I do think some of like the eccentric older male detectives are close to Poirot. Miss Silver nowhere near as good as Miss Marple. Mrs. Bradley, same thing. Miss Marple is an icon, the unassuming elderly spinster, so easily mistaken for the kindly grandmother no one notices, but that facade masks a shrewd mind, a sharp wit, and one of the best literary detectives in history. Underestimate her at your own peril. She solves her mysteries by listening, making observations, and using her position as a harmless old pussy, that's the word used in the novel a lot, to her advantage. She makes village parallels, comparing suspects in a case to people she knew in St. Mary Mead. Her knowledge that a small country village is much the same as a big city like London, and she may be an old lady, but she has an understanding of the present and the future. She is not prudish. She understands sex and violence and human nature. That is her hobby. And if you listen to the All About Agatha podcast, the late host of that, Catherine Brobeck, had this dark Marple theory that Miss Marple was a merciless figure who enjoyed hangings and had no qualms about turning people over to the police in the name of justice, and that she saw things no one else could see. And I definitely subscribe to that theory. There is a misconception about Miss Marple that she is this sweet old lady who knits and solves crime and it's very cozy, when she is so much more than that, and she is nothing like that at the same time. And if I were to really cop out here, I would have like tied her at number one, but it is her fewer appearances that land her at number two. And at number one, I mean, come on, it's Hercule Poirot. And like I said, when discussing Miss Marple, I do think there are other sort of eccentric or like the funny foreigner detectives who are iconic. Gideon Fell is a bit of a Poirot figure, Philo Vance even, not of the funny foreigner variety, but someone who is just insanely smart and comes to conclusions no one else can while also looking unusual. And like how Miss Marple uses her position as an old lady to gain information, Poirot does the same thing. He plays up the foreignness so people think he's harmless. He plays up the Papa Poirot so young women confide in him. For as different as Poirot and Marple are, they also have considerable overlap. They prefer the psychology to the physical clues. They prefer sitting back and thinking and only act when they absolutely have to. They both pass on the credit to the detective in the novel, and that is how they can continue to operate in the shadows. Poirot is more famous, though, especially early on, as a well known private detective, taking cases only that interest him. And of course, we have him retiring to grow vegetable marrows in the murder of Roger Ackroyd. We have his big mustaches and his fancy clothes and his Blackberry cassis. He even wears like those fancy clothes when he's in like rural areas. I always get a kick out of when people don't recognize him and he gets irritated. And Poirot just has so many fun character moments. I love when the jury accuses him of murder and death in the clouds, and his rivalry with Monsieur Giraud of the Sûreté and Murder on the Links. His tendency to not understand the English idiom, though sometimes this is intentional, sometimes I think he says it's intentional when it's not. I stabbed my toe is like the one that lives rent free in my head. Whereas Miss Marple is a strong defender of traditional justice, Poirot is not above declaring himself a god or a judge or jury, and on rare occasion, executioner. He lets certain murderers take the honorable way out via suicide or even just letting them get away with it, something Miss Marple would never do, although, to be fair, she does once. I love the ending of Problem at Sea, where he basically murders someone there, and it's actually really funny. And of course, we have Curtain, which I will not spoil, but just full of character moments. Poirot is often called the world's greatest detective, and it's for a reason. So Poirot comes in at number one. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think of this ranking. And also, I'm sure I missed someone, and I'm sure someone out there will let me know. Actually, as I'm wrapping up this video and thinking about it now, I believe I left off Inge the taxi driver from St. Mary, Mead. I believe he's a recurring character, but again, the list was already made, the video was already made. I'm sure I missed some other minor people and people we can like quibble about. But let me know who your top favorite recurring characters are in Christie. Again, probably Poirot and Marple, but let me know some other like random ones you like are really fun. Like I like Albert a lot. I have Albert very high, probably higher than most people would. So just let me know about that. And next week, I am reviewing another Christie novel, Hickory Dickory Dock. So stay tuned for that. It'll be a doozy, let's say the least. But until next time, Mystery Files.